Ari, we've done these bubble watch videos every week, and they've been fairly contentious. The chat's lit up because there's been a lot of different arguments. This feels different because it feels like there's not a lot of teams on the bubble after what happened Saturday.
You know what this actually is, Andy? It's bubble watch, but nobody's actually on the bubble. We're watching teams, but they're not really there. So the thing that I found going into the weekend, and I'm sure you did too with bracketology, Andy, is that I thought this was going to be inherently difficult. You know, with all the chaos, whenever you have all these teams losing unexpectedly, it really is hard to, go through all the results and try to figure out mathematically who's playing in the conference championship games, who's out, who's in. Like, it's hard. But actually, once you found your top 12, and once you kind of decided who you thought was going to win the conference championship games, I thought it was very straightforward. So, my bracket, I think, mirrors very similarly to yours. We have a few differences. I've got Ohio State number 1 and Oregon 5. You have them flipped. I think we both have SMU in at the 11 seed or as a second ACC team. Arizona State's in my bracket. Like, there's a lot of similarities, but when you get to the bubble, that's why there's really no bubble watch, because the first 4 out that I have in my bubble watch this week are Alabama, Clemson, Ole Miss, and Iowa State. And I think when people look at the bubble watch thing every week, they're thinking of teams that are so close to getting in and might get in. But we've gotten to the point now where the first 4 out are actually teams that, as things stand right now, have no shot of getting in at all. Now, Clemson needs Miami or SMU to lose before the ACC championship game to open the door up for them. Like, they're not technically dead, but they need a lot of help. But if chalk goes, Alabama will not make the playoff, and I don't think they'll make it no matter what. Clemson will not make the playoff. Ole Miss won't make the playoff after suffering their 3rd loss. And Iowa State, who could play Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game, if they were to lose that game, would not make it. So the only team that really, I think you could say, has the best chance of making the playoff at all for the first 4 teams out is Iowa State, and they'd have to play their way into it on the field.
Yeah, that Iowa State is the one that can play its way into it on the field. The other team that can play its way into it on the field is Texas A&M. Texas A&M can beat Texas. That would make the SEC championship game for Texas A&M. Then they would have to beat Georgia. I actually think they have to win both to make it in, because that's a 3-loss team right now. It's not working out any other way. And we were watching the Texas A&M Auburn game, the crazy 4 overtime game, and it was interesting how it shook out, because if Texas A&M won that game, there was going to be a scenario where Texas A&M could have made the SEC championship game against Texas, regardless of the result of the Texas A&M game. I'm glad it worked out this way, where you get the incredibly high stakes of the Texas and Texas A&M game at Kyle Field, because
I was like sweating the entire game, hoping for the most stakes. I didn't want A&M to lose. I wanted everything, and it turned out
you didn't even realize they needed to lose to get the stakes.
That's how convoluted this stuff is, Andy. Like, I didn't even know that I was rooting for against my interests.
Well, and that's the other thing. Like you mentioned Iowa State. While you were talking, I went back to the site that we've been using to simulate these things, and it's bball.notnothing.net if you want to have some fun. So I went back to the Big 12 one, and I was like, wait, if they all win, is it Arizona State, Iowa State, or Arizona State, BYU? No, if they all win, it's Arizona State, Iowa State. So if Iowa State wins Farmageddon and then were to beat Arizona State in the Big 12 title game, then they would be in the playoff. So they can play their way in. So you've got this is where you have like the basketball where what we're used to with the tournament champ bid thief situation, and we don't have that as much in football. Probably won't have that much as much in football, but that's where that comes into play.
Well, I think that the thing that Bubble Watch meant to me when we started doing this is, here are the teams that might lose a debate, right? Or teams that are at the end of the road, pretty close to being in. And what I've found is, as the results pour in, every week goes by, the Bubble Watch becomes less of a debate and more just the circumstance of where these teams are going to be ranked at the end of the year. So my next 4 out here, Andy, are South Carolina, Colorado, Texas A&M, and in Illinois. Now, A&M, as you mentioned, could play their way in. If they were to beat Texas and win the SEC championship game, they are in the playoff field. But South Carolina is probably dead in the water. Not probably, they are. Colorado, I still think that there's a slim chance for them to play in Dallas and play their way into the field. But again, they're probably going to be ranked somewhere in the 20s, which is where you would find them on this chart. As a 3-loss team now, Texas A&M has to play their way in, and then Illinois is going to finish the season as a 10-2 or a 9-3 team, and they'll be ranked number 22. So, like, there's no Illinois discussion at all in the playoff, but as it pertains to where they're going to end up in the final CFP poll, they're going to be in the next 4 out. There's no team that's just sitting in the wings waiting to get in. The only teams that are on my bubble watch that can get in have to play their way in, and some of them need the circumstances to even allow them to play in to work out in their favor.
Can we explain South Carolina? Because that's one that's kind of been a cause for everybody. If South Carolina were to beat Clemson, they'll be 9-3. They'd be one of the better 9-3 teams in the country. And everyone's like, wow, this is such a good 9-3 team. That's a team I wouldn't want to play. They're scary, blah, blah, blah. Here's why South Carolina wouldn't be in. They would be blocked. They would be blocked by Alabama, which has 3 losses and beat South Carolina. And they would be blocked by Ole Miss, which has 3 losses and beat South Carolina.
Yeah. So I think South Carolina is probably playing better. Not probably, is playing better than those teams. But again, they lost a few that, the Ole Miss game less so, but they lost a few heartbreakers that they could have won. And if they would have beaten LSU or they would have beaten Alabama, games that they were winning in the fourth quarter, they would have been in the field right now. So, but again, you have to win your games, and you gotta. I know we did a lot of excusing of SEC losses this year, but 2 we can excuse. 3 is when you draw the line.
Also, if there are folks out there who want to know how to see Coach Prime, Travis Hunter, Shador, and company in the playoff after losing to Kansas yesterday and not being able to tackle anybody, the path is there. The path is there. So here's how I'm playing around in the Big 12 tiebreaker side right now, Ari. If you want to see Colorado
playing around in the background on the calculator.
Oh, yeah. If you want to see Colorado play in the Big 12 championship game, what you need is, it's not as complicated as I thought it was going to be. BYU needs to lose to Houston. Iowa State needs to lose Farmageddon to Kansas State. And yes, that was just an excuse for me to say Farmageddon because it's my favorite rivalry name. That would give you Colorado, Arizona State. If somehow Arizona State were to lose the Territorial Cup game to your alma mater, Ari, which I don't think is going to happen, but if it somehow happened and BYU lost to Houston and Iowa State lost to Kansas State, your Big 12 championship game would be Colorado Baylor. And who would have had that at the beginning of the season?
Electricity. Yeah. So I did what I could in terms of the most likely. That's why I arrived with Arizona State at the 4.
Here's another reason why. Because both of us talked about this. We were texting back and forth as we were right. You were doing Bubble Watch. I was doing bracketology. The ACC suddenly feels like a 2-bid league as long as Miami and SMU win next week and both enter the ACC championship game at 11-1.
Yeah. And, funny enough, if the 11 seed and the 3 seed play each other in the 3 seed's first game in the playoff field. So, like, you are starting to see, if Miami is in fact, or the winner of the ACC championship game could be SMU too, is in fact the 3 and the losers, the 11, they would play in the second round if they were to advance again. If the loser would advance in the first round. So, yeah, no, the bracket is exciting to look at, but the biggest winner of my bubble watch is Oregon, because they went from having to face the winner of a hypothetical matchup between Tennessee and Texas to playing UNLV and Arizona State. So, like, the 5 seed versus 1 seed, is not the best seed to have, unless what you think comes true. And Boise's the 4, and then
I think if they just keep winning, they'll be the 4. But that you disagree with me on that. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's impossible though. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, the bubble watch is really the out watch, because most of these teams are going to finish in between 13 and 22 in the rankings, but really have no realistic path into the field at the moment. So, not really that. I don't think people are going to get upset, because it just kind of is what it is at this point.
It is, and it's more watching teams on the bubble that can still play their way in is what we're going to be watching. Now, we keep making a lot of assumptions, and I warned last week, don't make so many assumptions. Yeah. Weird things can happen, and then you get Florida beating Ole Miss, and you get Oklahoma destroying Alabama. those 3 lost teams that we've utterly dismissed, if there's more chaos next week, we actually may be talking about them on the bubble this time next week. There's no telling. We've never been through this before. It's never happened before. We don't know how it's going to go. We do know November tends to get a little weird. It got very weird this past weekend. We'll see if it gets even weirder next weekend.